to Amnesty for hosting us in this lovely venue with air conditioning, and the Syrian British Council, as well as all of our lovely panel. And of course, thank you all to you in person and online. For those in person, thank you for coming out on one of the 2 summer days that we're going to have. Your brownie points will be duly noted that you have attended. And to those online, there's, I'm told, a significant audience online as well. So thanks to everyone there. Small housekeeping: if there's a fire, do leave the building. Bathrooms are downstairs, and there's a reception afterwards downstairs. We will remind you at the end about that as well. I'm Emma Beals. I'm moderating this evening. I'm a long-time Syria botherer, wearer of many hats, and it's a real honor to be allowed to moderate today. I'm really humbled. I don't work full-time on Syria anymore, so it's always a great honor to be asked to come and participate in an event like today, because I do remain a loyal friend to those who are trying to seek a free Syria. So speaking of friends, the panel tonight, you're going to learn a lot. It's a fantastic panel. From the end, we have Dr. Yaman Alqadri. She's a survivor of the violations that we will hear more about this evening, and also a psychiatrist. Then we have Mazen Darwish. I don't know if we need to a big introduction. You should all know who he is. He's a prominent human rights activist and director of the Syrian Center for Media and Freedom of Expression. Fadel Abdul Ghani, also a prominent human rights activist and director of the Syrian Network for Human Rights. And online, we have Dr. Yasmine Nahlawi. She has a PhD in international law, and she's the author of the report Militia on Campus: The Crimes of the National Union of Syrian Students at Damascus University, and the director of the Syrian British Council's investigations team. So we're going to hear from all of them very shortly. Many of you are old friends and colleagues or Syrian yourselves, but some of you are not. We're here today to talk about opportunities for the new UK government. So if you are new to Syria, welcome. We are very glad that you're here, either in person or online. For your benefit, I'll run through a couple of top lines of where we are, and then we will crack on. So in early 2011, as most of you know, Syrians took to the street to demand freedom from a regime that had been engaging in the behaviors that you'll hear about tonight for some time before all of this started. Please move closer to the mic. Yes. Their calls were met with violence and a devastating war that continues today. So don't let anyone fool you. The reduction in conflict-related violence doesn't equate to peace. The war is still ongoing every day. There's an estimated 500,000 dead at this point, and over 100,000 people still missing in the prisons, and that's the ones that are still missing. Some are being detained today as we speak. It's not a historical problem, even though we're going to hear about investigations from some time ago. Detentions are continuing every day. And so we're going to hear a lot about the pursuit of criminal justice and accountability today from those that are doing it. But to put my 2 cents worth up front for the policymakers in the room, there's no justice for the victims of these crimes if they fear they will be sent back to the perpetrator of those same crimes from Lebanon or Turkey or Europe, which is the current state of play. But I digress. We're going to go to Yasmine first. Yasmine, I want to turn to you as the lead investigator of this new report to take us into a bit more detail about what you've learned. So Yasmine, can you share a few of your new report's top findings with us, please?
Hi, Emma. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone in attendance and to Amnesty International for hosting. I'm sorry to the panelists. I see you have to crane your necks to see me. I do wish that I could be with you in person today. So yeah, I'll get started by giving an introduction to the National Union of Syrian Students, or what I'll refer to from now as the NUSS, and frame what was the role of the NUSS and talk about the top line findings of the crimes committed by the NUSS university as per our investigation. So the NUSS is effectively the students' union in Syria. So just like we have a students' union in the UK, there's a student union in Syria. It is a national body. It operates at the national level. It is affiliated and controlled by the regime. And it purports to represent Syrian students in public and private universities across the country, as well as Syrian students abroad. It has a national executive bureau which sets the national policy, and it also has branches on individual campuses across the country. And even within an individual campus, we could have sub-branches called administrative committees, which could be within specific faculties. So for example, an administrative committee in the Faculty of Engineering, Dentistry, Medicine, etc. Before 2011, the NUSS played a surveillance and monitoring role against Syrian students across the country. And it also had a role of cultivating Ba'athist leaders. So identifying youth that could be fit to rise up the ranks in the Syrian government. And it also had a role of mobilizing the Syrian youth, of course, all to the benefit of the regime. After the revolution started in 2011, it continued to assume these monitoring surveillance roles, but it assumed additional roles, including clamping down on peaceful, nonviolent student activity on campus, as well as detaining and torturing students also on campus. And I want us all to imagine being in a university classroom and knowing that your colleague, your classmate or course mate sitting X number of seats away from you has the power to not only monitor and surveil your physical and online activity, but also has the power to detain you on campus and torture you on campus. So this was the situation after the uprising started in Syria. So our investigation focused on the University of Damascus after 2011. And the focus of the University of Damascus was firstly because of its significance as being located in the heart of the country's capital. And secondly, because it witnessed quite significant student activity on campus. So some of the main findings that we found in our investigation included a pattern whereby the Students' Union, the NUSS, attacked and suppressed any form of student activity on campus. So students would engage in nonviolent protests on campus, and there was a pattern by which the NUSS would encircle these protests and then attack students with batons, sticks, etc. There was one protest in particular that we heard from more than one witness in the medical school in April of 2011, where approximately 50 students were staging a silent sit-in. They were adorned in their white coats and they were holding flowers to emphasize the nonviolent nature of their demonstration. And they were brutally attacked by the NUSS. One witness described to us that he was dragged to the basement of the nearby School of Dentistry and he was beaten until he required hospitalization. Which leads me into the second main finding of the report, which is arbitrary detention by the National Union of Syrian Students. NUSS members arbitrarily detained students from protests, which was one of the scenes, but also from the university gate or courtyard, from the libraries, canteens on campus, and even from the student residences. And they would hold them in interrogation rooms on campus. So there were several interrogation rooms within NUSS administrative committee offices. So like I mentioned earlier, those are offices within specific faculties on campus. So we know that witnesses were held at least in the committee offices of the School of Medicine, Economics, and Arts and Humanities. There was another detention area in the basement of the School of Dentistry, another one in the Higher Languages Institute, another one in the student residences basement of one of the student residences buildings, as well as several guard rooms across campus that were used by security guards for the universities. So those were also areas where the NUSS detained students. Now, following from that is the third finding, which is what happens once students are detained in these rooms, is we found a pattern of torture that was committed by NUSS members on campus. And the methods include slapping, punching, kicking, hitting with their hands, with sticks, with batons, with pipes. And I don't mean here that a student is just getting intermittently hit or slapped or kicked. You have to imagine a student on the floor, curled in the fetal position, being attacked by one or more of their fellow students, and multiple witnesses described that they required hospitalization after this beating. There was also psychological torture that was described to us, including the threat of murder, the threat of detaining family members or killing family members, as well as tasing. We also found patterns or gendered patterns of torture, including for males cursing their female family members, threatening to rape their female family members, and threatening to castrate them. For females, we documented invasive searches as well as vulgar cursing. And then after students would be detained and tortured at the hands of the NUSS on campus, many of them were detained by or were transferred, by hand to the state security services. So NUSS members would escort a student by hand to a nearby car for the security services and hand the students over to the security services. We had 5 students who were transferred to the political security Jubba or Misat branch, 3 students who were transferred to the General Intelligence Branch 251, also known as the Khatib branch, and 1 student who was transferred to the Air Force Intelligence Harasta branch. The last point that I want to emphasize here is that the NUSS actions were not random, they were not accidental, they were instead part of the very widespread, systematic, organized pattern of clamping down against any anti-regime sentiment on campus. And it was directly tied to the national clamp down against protests across Syria. So we know that the NUSS across all of these actions were working closely and directly with state security apparatuses. As we saw through several indicators. Firstly, for example, we saw the joint suppression of protests. So protests on campus were jointly suppressed by NUSS members as well as security forces working alongside them. The second indicator is that some witnesses described that when they were interrogated in NUSS offices, they were interrogated by older individuals, including those in military uniform. The third indicator is the direct transfer of students from NUSS custody to the security services. And the last indicator was the crossover in the interrogation between the NUSS and the security branches. So basically, there was a very clear transfer of information from the NUSS to the security branches. And one witness even described that an NUSS member was in the interrogation room with him in the state detention center. So I will end with that.
I think she said she.
I think she said she was finished. But thank you so much, Yasmine. Obviously, a lot of work has gone into this report, and you can read it online. Yasmine and her team have done some other amazing investigations as well that are really worth having a look at. And in this kind of diligent work, we're going to hear a bit more about the ecosystem around the pursuit of justice in Syria. But these kind of investigations are really important for even the international partners in this ecosystem. So the Commission of Inquiry, the IIIM, for the universal jurisdiction cases, these kind of research that brings what happened together into specific incidents is really important. So for folks on the call who are part of that ecosystem, who aren't in touch with some of our panelists, I would suggest that they be in touch with them at some point. Yaman, you are going to help us to situate some of what we've just heard in the human side, because I think that's really important. And I know it's really, really difficult to do this. And so I do commend you for your courage. I wondered if you could share a bit from your own sort of experiences with some of what we just heard about. And then I think you're going to help us understand it a little bit from your professional perspective as well.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Emma. Apologies if this is going to sound a bit scripted, but just for the purpose of the testimony. Thank you, everyone, for being here. What I'm about to tell you has happened 12 years ago, 13 years ago. And thank you for thanking me, but I'm also I'm going to explain later how those opportunities of giving testimonies and being part of telling the truth are part of the healing process. So on November 3rd in 2011, while on the university campus, I was captured, beaten up, and detained by Syrian regime agents. The crime I committed was that I had distributed earlier that fall some colored flyers around campus with slogans you could only anticipate from an undergraduate about our dreamy quest for freedom, dignity, and democracy. Later that day, and for the following 25 days, I had to discover firsthand what the consequences were for a student to be asking for such things under the Assad regime. While inside my university campus, the medical school, right after an anatomy lab, I got stopped by a group of members of the National Union of Syrian Students, a sub-organization of the ruling Ba'ath Party. My medical school colleague, very infamously known as Mr. Ashraf Saleh, stopped me, confiscated my student ID card, and dragged me into a small security booth. For a memorable couple of hours after that, I was continuously slapped, beaten up. I heard the worst swearings one can imagine. I was threatened to never see my family again and to be expelled from medical school. I was bleeding, I was scared and crying and attempting to scream for help. After that, I was delivered by the NUSS colleagues into a civilian car, sandwiched between two armed individuals. In the car, my head was pushed down to prevent me from seeing where I was being taken. And when I arrived at the unknown destination, I was led into a building and taken to an underground cell. Shortly after that, I was blindfolded again and was told that it was time to meet the boss. The moment I stepped into the boss's office, he asked his men to switch my handcuffs from the front to the back, and I was seated on a plastic chair. He began by asking about the flyers and who I was working for and who was funding me. When not being too pleased with my answers, he picked up an electric taser, unknown to the barely 18-year-old me, what this tool was, and began delivering shocks all over my body, getting at times closer to private parts and verbally threatening to tase them directly. I have no recollection of the period of time during which this was happening. It could have been an hour or 10 minutes. My mind was rather focused on one idea or one thought, that this is not permanent and it will come to an end. When he eventually instructed his men to take me back to the cell and to remind him of me in a few weeks' time, I spontaneously objected by screaming, "No." He yelled back with anger and threatened, "What would you like then? Would you like to be raped by my guys instead?" I yelled again, "No," but only louder this time. This was the physical side of things, but it was the physical pain was quite incomparable to the psychological agony one has to go through, enduring hearing the voices, screams, and cries of men being tortured. I remember initially trying many tricks to avoid hearing them, blocking the voices with my clothes or trying to babble loudly so I block the sounds, but they continued. At the end, I might have become, unfortunately, slightly desensitized and chose to pray for them every time I realized a new interrogation session had begun. I am by all means among the very, very lucky survivors to be in front of you here today, and looking back and comprehending the scope of the regime's crimes, my relatively very short experience is further dwarfed by the suffering of other detainees and the losses of millions of Syrians. I may not be able to be the voice of all the students who were captured, tortured, and delivered to the intelligence services in Syria, but I want to mention one young man, Ayham Ghazul. Ayham was a dental master's student at Damascus University who was detained in November 2012, a year after me. This is how his mom, and I'm going to quote her actually, describes what happened to him. His life was ended and dreams of a free Syria squashed when fellow students stormed his lecture hall and dragged him to a room in his university's medical faculty. Torturing him in ways too painful to recount, he endured hours of violence at the hands of the National Union of Syrian Students. They tortured him so badly that he later died of internal bleeding in a government detention facility. His mom, Maryam, recognized him among the Caesar photos a few years later. Having been almost a student for 10 years in different universities after I left Syria, it continues to always kind of surprise me and baffle me that this organization is a civil society organization. It was supposed to represent students' interests and perhaps organize them for a socially meaningful impact. However, in Assad's Syria, the way it operated was essentially a death squad during the time of revolution, and in time of peace, it functioned as a surveillance and indoctrination machine. Upon my release, towards the end of 2011 and at the peak of the nonviolent movement in Syria at the time, when I left, I was received with immense warmth, acceptance, and compassion by thousands and thousands of Syrians who didn't know me before. All they knew was that I was a young female medical student who was unjustly detained for many weeks while the regime continued to advance his propaganda about fighting terrorism. I was given ample opportunities and a sizable platform to tell and retell my story, to help in documenting and publicizing the regime's crime, all within an overarching purpose of advancing our just cause and contextualizing my personal experience within a broader and collective struggle. Time and time again, every time I recalled the story or gave a testimony, my painful recounting was often always, all the time, met with acknowledgement, validation, and affirmation. All of this was precisely what protected me from post-traumatic stress. And I'm now going to speak a little bit from my position as a mental health practitioner. Our psychological pain is a political one, and I can't do it in a good faith to deny or avoid this reality. Now, as I work at the NHS and other organizations with survivors of systemic and political violence from all parts of the world, treating mainly PTSD and other trauma-related mental health difficulties, and those years of education and clinical practice perhaps taught me one or two things about trauma and its impact on the individual and the community. For example, if we're just going to take PTSD as one of the most famous mental health difficulties that many survivors struggle with, we often define it by the nature of the trauma memories. Such memories are often loaded with the original emotions of fear, terror, disgust, or shame. These memories for the survivors are not simply recalled, but rather re-experienced, and for some on a very physical and visceral level. But what we also know from established research in the field, in this area, that what's equally relevant to the nature of those memories are what we call in our field post-traumatic appraisals. Essentially, what are appraisals? Appraisals are the way people make sense of their suffering. How do they understand it? How do they interpret it? How do they perceive it? These appraisals are often at the core of what maintains and prolongs suffering, psychological suffering, and stifles survivors' ability to heal, overcome, and even begin to plan for the future. When I sit in the clinic room, often across from survivors, I essentially help them do two things. The first is to narrate their trauma so I can bear witness and contextualize their trauma and suffering in the broader social, political, and at times global reality. The absence of a sense of justice, or even the hope of it, has certainly been one of the most prominent themes within the therapeutic space for refugees and survivors. This is why, despite all the political cynicism we could experience at times, we can never give up, can never give up on initiatives and efforts to activate international justice mechanisms or any other justice mechanisms to seek truth and accountability about the horrors committed in Syria, to give Syrians the chance to narrate their stories and for the world to bear witness, and to offer them a collective sense of justice and moral closure. This is simply and straightforwardly for me, for the sake of psychological, not only physical, survival of our communities and societies. This has, those trials and tribunals have happened before in history, and plenty of evidence actually from the literature shows how those trials have affirmed the survivors' suffering and the atrocities they endured, which was crucial and immense in their psychological recovery. I believe that my mother, if not talking about myself, and Maryam and Ayham Ghazul's mother, and every single Syrian who has been harmed by this draconian security apparatus in Syria are as deserving and equally deserving of the chance to achieve justice and accountability. Thank you.
Thank you, Yaman. I would really I think both your personal and professional testimonies are so powerful, and I would like to sort of co-sign on to the second part of that. 2 years ago, I was able to sit in a courtroom and see someone who had, in the context of Syria, killed people that I cared about immensely, and it was a truly transformative experience psychologically that I never could have understood or predicted before it happened. And I wholeheartedly agree that everybody who has suffered in Syria deserves that same kind of experience. Fadel, your organization has documented human rights violations in Syria throughout the conflict, like the ones that we've just heard about. And for those who haven't been on the Syrian Network for Human Rights website, I recommend you do. It's a huge repository of information. I think what's important to understand is these violations haven't ended. They are continuing. Fadel's organization and others are still documenting them. So the pursuit of justice isn't just about righting the wrongs of the past. It's about righting the wrongs of today. Can you give us a bit of a quick picture of the rights situation now and why it's so important to be doing this work?
Yeah, it's a tough question, always for me. Many thanks to the Syrian British Consortium and Amnesty International for organizing and for the invitation. Yeah, the overall view of the human rights situation in Syria, at least for the first half of 2024, is tough and it's a dark point. But I would try my best and link it to what my colleagues said. In fact, the most prominent violations that are taking place in Syria are almost the same violations that the National Union of Syrian Students has committed, because this union is a part of the Syrian regime or a part attached to the regime. The union has committed against students the same practices as the regime has committed against the Syrian people, such as extrajudicial killing, detention, torture, suppression of freedom of opinion and expression, prevention of demonstration, and attacks on university facilities and equipment. We documented the continued illegal killing of civilians. So from the beginning of 2024 until July, we documented the death of at least 429 civilians, including 65 children, 38 women. This is for the whole parties of the conflict and the controlling forces in Syria. I can't distribute those figures, but due to the time limit, so I will like to go on because a lot of violations are still going on. Yeah, so 62 by the Syrian regime, 5 by the Russian forces, and yeah, the list is going on, the opposition, the SDF, the PYD. For the arbitrary arrest, we documented no less than 1,236 cases, including 56 children and 30 women. Also, this is the part of all the parties of the conflict. The vast majorities of those transferred to be disappeared. So 1,007 cases of them disappeared forcibly. Okay. It's a heavy mic, actually. So torture inside detention centers affiliated with those forces, the controlling forces, and the conflict parties has not stopped. We documented the death of at least 53 people due to torture, including a child. Refugees who were forcibly returned from Lebanon by Lebanese General Security to the Syrian-Lebanese border area have been targeted by the Syrian regime through detention. The arbitrary arrest, the enforced disappearance, and torture carried out by the Syrian regime, confirming the repeated violation of the International Court of Justice decision issued on November 16, 2023. We are monitoring the regime implementation of the court's decision. We have issued 2 reports, which we'll soon issue the 3rd. So from November 16 until now, we recorded 687 cases of arbitrary arrest, including 9 children and 23 women. And those who been forcibly disappear from those, the average always 90%, between 85 to 90%, 553 forcibly disappeared. Second, 33 cases of killing due to torture, and only 4 victims' bodies were delivered to their families. Third, there were 16 cases of missing persons who were registered as a dissent in the Civil Registry Department. And we note that among the cases that were registered, several victims who were related to each other, and cases of political activists and university students. In all cases, the cause of this was not mentioned. The regime didn't hand over the bodies to the families, and the death was not announced at the time of its occurrence. Attack on vital facilities. We recorded no less than 57 incidents on attacks on vital facilities, including 17 schools and 2 medical facilities and 7 on places of worship. Freedom of opinion and expression. On 23rd April 2024, the Syrian regime issued through the People Assembly the document establishing the Ministry of Information. The SNHR issued a report on June 13, in which we confirmed that this law is nothing but a new means of controlling the work of journalists and controlling media content. The law clearly conflicts with the international and even local laws. Control properties and land. Oh, long list. As part of the Syrian regime strategy of controlling properties and land, which is also carried out based on arsenal of laws that violate human rights, in a report issued on July 16, we documented no fewer than 13 collective decisions to seize movable and immovable assets. So what is the distinction between that and the seizing properties and land? Based on those seizure decision, the Syrian regime can now even seize cars, gold. So it's expand. 1 minute? Oh, 1 minute. You give my colleagues double than my time. So this injustice. I'm fighting I'm fighting for accountability. Oh, so 1 0 1 0 10 minutes. Okay, so I will jump. You told me mentioned the violation. What I can do? Okay, I will move ahead. I will explain later on about this percussional seizure policy, but moving ahead, the report on the website. So appointing people to the Syrian People Assembly, appointing. On July 15th, the area under the regime control forces witnesses the election of People Assembly. The SNHR issued a report on July 24th in which we presented an analysis of the results of this election, which are considered invalid and illegitimate for many reasons. The absence of judicial oversight guarantees the election organized by the regime with the lack of independence of the Supreme Election Committee and the Supreme Constitutional Court. These elections were held in corrupted and illegitimate environment based on the illegitimate 2012 Constitution. The complete dominance of Al-Ba'ath Party in election and swallowing the majority of the seats. Also, I will move ahead. So all of these violations and their continued over years have forced people to flee. There are approximately 6.5 million people displaced inside Syria, and there is a decrease in the humanitarian aid to the lack of funding, given that many donor countries are involved in other conflicts, such as Ukraine and Gaza. Briefly, talking about the prominent violation committed by the Union, we issued 2 reports in 2013. At that period, the university in the like witnessing a broad popular movement. For this reason, they were subjected to many violations. But very briefly, we documented the killing of 1,007. So those figures up to until July 24th. 2024. So we documented the killing of 1,076 university students, including 94 women, and 162 university students died due to torture. And on attacks against university, we recorded 50 incidents. Finally, within 1 minute, this one now 1 minute. So those statistics providing especially violation against university students represent the minimum bar, and I will talk about documentation in my second intervention. Why is that? Because in the documentation process, we consider this person is a student or not as a secondary information, comparing with other information such as his name, the time, the place of killing, time of killing, who committed the killing, the type of weapon. Second, not all of these violations are carried by the Union, but due to the nature and its establishment and structure, it's contribute to them in one way or another. The Union practices are not individual or isolated from the Syrian regime policy, but carefully designed by security services. For example, the investigation and torture operation, in many of which security forces participated, were aimed to entraining other students, and everyone was handed over to the security forces. The central nature of violation, especially killing, torture, and enforced disappearance, make them amount to crimes against humanity. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Fadel, and sorry for rushing you. There's obviously a wealth of information, not just from this year, but from the entire conflict. So please do avail yourself of those reports. But part of why that is so important is because of what Mazen is going to talk to us about, which is about the using all of that information, not just to put it on a website, but to pursue justice. So Mazen, you've been a central figure in the pursuit of justice for quite a long time now. Are you able to give us a bit of an overview of the challenges and opportunities for pursuing justice in Syria and some of the initiatives that are going on at the moment?
Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you for Amnesty, and I'm also very happy to be here with Dr. Yaman and Fadel and Dr. Yasmine, and thank you for the wonderful, great report, honestly. and also always, as usual, wonderful work from the Syrian network. Because Yaman mentioned that the student union should be civil society group. So I born in Palestine and spent first six years there, and usually I'm Mazen, Mimo, تعال يما, Mazen روح يما. Right? Then I came to Syria. My father's Syrian, so I came to Syria, and I go directly to the school, and suddenly find that my name الرفيق الطليعي مازن درويش. Don't know. It's I try with Google to find it, but it's something that like Vanguard, Commoner. Yeah.
Great.
And I was 6 years. So this is also how the regime control the society, control everything. So just a child from 6 to 12, he's part from organization called Tala'a al-Ba'as, which link to al-Ba'as party. And from the day one, they start building his knowledge and ideology to for become very good citizen like they want. And also then after Shabib al-Thawra from 12 to 18, and also when they go to the university, we have the, so this is Al-Vas and the regime, how they create this civil society just to control the people. So Emma, give us 5 minutes, so I will not go too much and in several things. I will go not to challenge. There is a lot of challenge, and I will not speak about everywhere or speak about UK and the opportunity from this new government. So, and it's good that they start give very good signal regarding the refugee and sending refugee to Rwanda. Now the observation about the ICC prosecutor and all the good willing and good speech through the election period. And also we are talking about Prime Minister who usually start as a human rights defender. So yeah, there is a lot of expectation and there is a lot of opportunity. And I'll start also from my experience here in UK. Finally, last year, the War Crime Unit decided to open investigation, a structured investigation about Syria, because there is a lot of crime linked to the ICC mandate. And it's delay only 10 years from other European countries. This is a start in 2012 in other countries. So just last year, the last government opened their structured investigation about the crime in Syria. And this is show how the things goes, but also from my direct experience, where there is some work, legal work in the UK. And where we working, me with my colleague in the organization, many other Syrian organizations with several war crime units in France, in Germany, Belgium, Sweden, Austria, FBI in the USA, Canada, many other. Yes, justice take time. It's long term. But between opening the investigation and send the charge, it doesn't take years usually. And this is our experience here with the Metropolitan Police and SO 15 in the UK. And this is one of the things, yes, the new government can't change it. It's not acceptable that such kind investigation take years without any result until now, wasting the time, wasting the resource, and also the life of the victim. It's not about the verdict. It's not about court. This is our life, the victim life. And in this legal file, I'm talking about we are present 19 victims on behalf of thousands, but there is 19 victims in this file. So this is something the new government can do. If it's need more resource, if it's need political decision, but they can do. And there is all the need. And also, I hope if this is go to the Attorney General, to Mr. Richard Hermer, that it will not take this time. So I hope if it's go to his desk. But if not, I think the Home Office and the Attorney General Office, they can hold a meeting with the Metropolitan and the Mayor of London asking why the Syrian files, legal files, took all of this time. And yes, people like Yaman and Ayham and all the victims from any country, they deserve answer. This is one file, but also all of us know that there is a struggle to refer the Syria crime case to the ICC. Yes, there is a veto from Russia and China. Yes, the Syrian government, it's not a state party in the Rome status. Yes, the NGOs try to use Article 15, but also there is the Article 14 in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. And I will read what it says. So Article 14 say, a state party may refer to the prosecutor a situation in which one or more crimes within the jurisdiction of the court appear to have been committed, requesting the prosecutor to investigate the situation for the purpose of determining whether one or more specific person should be charged with the commission of such crime. This is the Article 14. I'm not talking about the veto or Syria. So UK, they can, as a state party, to refer directly to the court. I don't think there is any crime mentioned in the ICC statutes. The regime doesn't do it in Syria. So they can send all of it. And as we expected from them to show a political leadership and economical leadership, also we expected from this government to show ethical leadership and use Article 14 and make a referral for all this crime done in Syria to the ICC. And I believe that the prosecutor, Mr. Karim Khan, have all the tools he needed to hold a professional investigation. And all of us, all the Syrian, all the world, we knew certainly that there is in Damascus a suspect. But we will wait the result of this kind of investigation. What also the government can do, I think they can do a lot still. All of us know that the ICJ, thanks to Holland and Canada, they go to the ICJ and try to use this mechanism. And also, we have a lot of expectation. And as civil society, also, we do our best, our duty. And we have a list, my colleague from SLDV here also, a list of provisional measure. And unfortunately, the court take only two and very void provisional measure. So also, UK can join this process in the ICJ, and still we can, and we have the legal reason to ask again for another provisional measure. This can be. As we know, there is many arrest warranty in France specifically, in Germany, and let me say that there is 12 arrest warranty regarding a crime and suspect in Syria, 1 in Germany, and there is 11 in France, 8 regarding suspect and 3 linked to convicted criminal. And we want to see UK put this arrest warranty in exist. UK is still part from the Europol. And we need also a clear declaration that these decisions from these courts accepted and exist and working in the UK. Okay, I know the new government, they are not Santa Claus, so I will not go and talk about all what they can do or did. But yeah, I believe there is a lot.
Fantastic.
5 minutes.
Yeah. I think that obviously we're not going to get the exhaustive list of policy priorities in 5 minutes, but again, for those shaping UK policy, please do avail yourselves of the deep resources that all of our speakers and some others in the audience have to offer, and all of their knowledge of these issues. Those online, please pop your questions in the Q&A as we go through. I'm minded, we started 10 minutes late, so I think we're okay to go 10 minutes over, but only 10 minutes over. And I do want to make sure we get to questions. So pop those in there now, but I'll turn to Yasmine with a similar question to what I just asked Mazen. Obviously, you're part of an organization that is based in the UK and are working with the UK government. How can those in the UK government, but also others in the room who share the ambition of seeking justice for Syria, think of you guys and other investigators and work with you to, further your shared ambition? And what would you like to see from the new government and from justice projects or initiatives that they're supporting to support you to move forward?
Yeah, thanks again, Emma. I'm going to pick up from a point that was mentioned by both Yaman and Mazen, which is this idea of civil institutions or civil society in Syria. And I think one very important point, and if it's mentioned by 3 speakers, then definitely, take heed that there are no independent institutions or civil society in Syria. Any institution that claims to be independent or claims to be civil society is either directly managed or controlled by the regime. And, this is one of the reasons that we chose SBC's intervention in this event to be specifically about the NUSS, because we're talking about, on the one hand, a body, the Students' Union, that is supposed to represent students, and on the other hand, the university as an academic institution that should promote academic freedom, promote intellectual curiosity, promote critical thinking, prepare a future generation of Syrian leaders. And what we saw is the exact opposite. And so from here, I echo every policy suggestion and focus that Mazen mentioned. And I will, instead of repeating everything, I'll focus on a different set of policy asks or areas of interest, which is that the UK and other countries have to be very careful about what partners they adopt when they are working with actors that are working in Syria or on Syria. There has to be due diligence that is exercised with respect to adopting partners. And here, trusted organizations with track records, such as the Syrian British Consortium, such as SCM, SNHR, can help in advising regarding establishing these kinds of partnerships. And I think the other important point when you're thinking of institutions or organizations like the NUSS is that these are the same institutions that are being used now by the regime to whitewash its crimes. They're being used to polish the image of the regime. So, for example, with the NUSS in 2020, it underwent a change in leadership. Its former leader, Ammar Saati, was on the sanctions list of the US, the UK, and Europe. In 2020, he was replaced by Darin Sleiman. Darin Sleiman as a supposedly intellectual figure, as a supposed more refined individual who could provide a new face to the NUSS. And side note, Darin Sleiman serves on the political negotiations committee for the Assad regime. So again, here we see the direct link between a supposed civil society entity and the regime. And Darin Sleiman, when she assumed leadership, she said that, the NUSS would go in a new direction, et cetera, but there was no acknowledgement of the systematic commission of crimes by the NUSS. There was no admission of crimes. There was no admission of the right to accountability for the thousands of victims and survivors that underwent crimes or were victims of crimes on behalf of the NUSS. But the NUSS still is being used as a tool to promote the Assad regime's image abroad. Since 2020, we've seen the NUSS being invited to international events and conferences, including, believe it or not, by the United Nations Development Program. We're seeing former members from the NUSS rise in the ranks within the Syrian regime and now representing Syria at senior levels, including more recently Omar Aroub's potential presence in the French Olympics. He was a former NUSS member, senior member, who ordered the brutal crackdown of protests and ordered the detention and torture of students. And he was supposed to represent the regime as the head of the Syrian Paralympics Committee. And he was actually in Paris in August of 2023 doing just that. So we have to be cognizant and aware of how these institutions are being used to re-normalize the Assad regime using its more soft tools. And in this respect, we shouldn't be concerned simply about security services or military branches. We need to also be concerned about these supposed civil society. The one last thing I will add is, from a more macro approach, is what we would like to see the UK adopt a human rights-centered approach towards Syria, but also towards other conflict situations, and more recently, and especially the conflict in Gaza. And a human rights-centered approach is not only conducive to civilian protection for victims and survivors on the ground, but it will also serve the best interests of the country itself. When you look at the ramifications from conflicts such as Syria, whether we're talking about the refugee crisis, terrorism, etc. And we know alongside the civilian protection approach, unfortunately, crimes have already been committed, and we have an unlimited number of victims and survivors. And here we have to supplement protection approaches with the need to seek accountability for victims and survivors. And I will end with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Yasmine. I'm going to start trying to wrap some of the questions from online into the questions I had for the panel. But if you can sort of in the room start sort of showing your hands, and I'll try to get to you very shortly as well. Just want to assess how many questions we've got. Fadel, to you, how can those in the room and for the UK government support the documentation and human rights work in Syria and advocate for justice, and how can that affect the normalization process that we're seeing going on?
First of all, I think that the documentation itself need to match the standard, and that's very essential. So there is for sure, and like in Syria, there is an extremely complex circumstances. So there are bound to be gaps, but we must be transparent and acknowledge those gaps and try to develop methodology to overcome them. So based on, so whenever we match the standard of documentation, based on this documentation, we are in a strong position to deliver our recommendation. And based on that, I have a list of recommendation in addition to what my colleagues said, so 20 minutes only. So the UK and first, the UN and the UK should consider the Union as integral part of the Syrian regime security apparatus that's involved in crimes against humanity. UN agency and states must immediately cease all forms of cooperation and engagement with the Union, including investigation, including any type of invitation to conference, event, or other international forums. The International Commission of Inquiry and the High Commissioner for Human Rights should conduct special investigation into the role of Union in violations against university students, issued a special report, and send a clear message to the rest of the UN bodies and countries. Educational and culture organizations affiliated with the UN, such as UNESCO, should exclude Union from educational or culture exchange programs. Universities in various countries, especially those that respect human rights, such as the UK, should not communicate with the Union and link this to its involvement in crimes against humanity. Donor countries should condition all aid they provide to Syrian educational institutions on complete separation from Union and human rights violations. Countries hosting Syrian students, including the UK, should implement vetting procedure to ensure that Union members involved in crimes are not granted visas or refugee status. The EU and other regional bodies should impose targeted sanctions on the leadership of the Union and members involved in human rights violations. Finally, the UN Special Rapporteur on the right of on the right to education should investigate and report on the impact of the Union on academic freedom and the right to education in Syria. So those are based on our documentation, how this Union is apart from the security forces, and based on the highest standard that we are following in the documentation, we have, I think, those solid recommendations and a practical one to be implemented.
Thanks, Fadel. I think those were really clear. So thanks for that. We've got a question, Mazen. I'm going to throw this over to you. There's some NUSS affiliated students who are now studying in Europe, and they had reported other students, and in some cases that may have resulted in death and detention. What sort of legal action or follow-up could be taken in those cases? And I'll ask you the second part of the other question, which is, because this relates directly to the kind of work that you're doing with UJ and so forth, where are the you know, where could there be more support in those kind of efforts?
Thank you very much. For the part one, if we are talking about anyone, if he's student or any human, he linked to crimes, not his political opinion, because also there is a lot of complaint we receive that this one he would like and status or his support the regime. So we want to be very clear and certain. Anyone who suspect that he's linked to crimes, yes, there is legal tools. We need to support it, and we need to use all the legal action we can do it. And I think we can. And this has happened with a lot of other Syrian in different country. And I think many of these, even the police war crime unit, now they put a lot of even Arabic label in their website, telephone, and we can use it. There is many organization and the human rights defender who working in this field. But also we need to be careful about using social media, which sometimes this is even affected our work. Or let me say many cases where there is a potential arrest for war crime suspect, but they get noticed because of the social media. And I know this is done for good willing. They putting that this shabih and this person coming, and then I think there is a lot of things we need to do it, start control our feeling. It's not easy. I can't blame anyone, but also sometimes we give alarm for those suspects. We need to be careful about this issue. Look, second question, it's need a lot of time, but let me say that it's from country to country. It's not same, and it's sometimes also feel that if we know anything or if something happened or someone, and just we inform, and they should arrested him. Again, I'm one of those victim, and I totally understand. I have list of suspect maybe from personal, it's hundreds, but it's not goes like this. There is condition and a lot of legal condition, and it's different from country to country. So we need also to get attention. Maybe this is the NGOs, the human rights defender, the organization who working in this field, not the victim. Sometimes feel that we put too much pressure on the shoulder of the victim when we ask them to know the law in this country and how. But also we need to communicate more, to explain. We need to have more material in Arabic also. The majority of those victims and witnesses, they are refugee. Some of them, like me, hardly speak very bad English. And we need also to explain the process. And this is, I think, how also it's important UK to continue supporting human rights organization in civil society, working in documentation, in litigation, who's even the diaspora organization who communicate with those people. This is very important. We invest a lot last 12, 13 years. And now can understand how everything shifting. Syria is not a priority after Ukraine and now Gaza and the economic problem everywhere. But it's will be horrible if we just destroyed all what we built through last years.
Maintaining that support is so important. I want to go to the audience. Yaman, I have a great question for you, but we're going to hold it back for a sec. There were 3 women who were brave enough to put up their hands earlier, so they get first dibs.
Shall I start?
Yeah, so it was you and then these 2 women at the front. If we'll do a group of 3, questions, not comments. Keep them short because we'll try and do another quick round and get another lot of.
Is it okay if I have 2 questions?
2 short questions is perfectly all right.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the Syrian British Consortium for making such an important and insightful event. First of all, my name is Ronay Hassan. I'm originally Kurdish from Syria, and I'm a journalist and documentary filmmaker. So my question is, how can the international community effectively support survivors of the document abuses, particularly those related to sex and gender-based violence, and seeking justice and rehabilitation? And thank you so much for your, Dr. Alqadri, for your bravery in sharing such a difficult testimony. My second question, what step can the UK government take in collaboration with other international partners to ensure the protection of students and academic freedoms in conflict zones and in our cases in Syria? If you don't mind, I don't know, would you like say it in Arabic? Maybe for some
It's
audiences
being
on the online.
it's being translated
okay.
online, so I think the folks with the translation on will have got.
All
But
right.
thank you for the kind offer.
Thank you. Thank you so
To
much.
the front here, and here, and then we will go to the panel and then back to the audience.
So my question is, how involved were the students in the union in the torture and abuse that they inflicted on their fellow students? And when it comes to accountability and justice, has there been any students forced to commit these atrocities, maybe in the same way that the regime has forced military personnel to kill civilians in the protests in the beginning of the revolution? Are they victims of subjugations, or are they nevertheless still perpetrators? And has there been any defectors that have come forward with testimonies, or maybe shall I say confessions on what they've done? And that's it.
Great. And just here.
Chloe Hedgematho, formerly of the BBC, now with Tortoise Media. This is for Mazen. I'm just interested, you talked about the police dragging their feet here and the authorities not doing enough. I know you probably can't give us any kind of detail, but of course, but can you give us a sense of, are there active investigations here that you wish were the police and the authorities were getting more of a move on? Or are we talking, because we've seen so much going on in Germany and France and other European countries, we haven't heard much from the UK, and I know the diaspora is much smaller here and the refugee population is smaller here, but just generally, in a very general sense, are there active investigations here right now?
Let's go very quickly from Mazen to that direct question, but I would say feel free to grab each other at the reception to extrapolate, make sure to corner him and get the full answer. Quick answer now, then we'll go to Yasmine for a very quick one on her methodology and who may or may not have come forward. And then Yaman, can we go to you for two questions? One is about supporting the victims, and the other is about how those of us in the UK can best use our voices to make sure that the government are on top of this. Mazen, yellow.
You said outside. Okay. Yeah, there is some active investigation running from long time, very long time. And I think the SO 15 have all what they need to take action to transfer this fight to the Attorney General.
We'll make a diplomat out of him one day. Yasmine.
Thanks, Emma. Just to comment real quickly on the methodology in terms of how involved were the NUSS students in the torture. They were the direct perpetrators of this torture. So the students involved with the NUSS were the ones themselves attacking protests, number one. Number two, detaining students. Number three, torturing these students. So there wasn't like an outside, like, you know, a group that was brought into torture. They were conducting this torture themselves. And then they were handing over the students to the security forces with full knowledge that once they did that, the individuals would be subject to more torture and interrogation in the detention facilities. In terms of defectors, that's a really interesting question. In not so much in the University of Damascus. I think another thing to bear in mind is that a lot of times these individuals who are chosen to assume leadership of the NUSS, they are hand selected. They are the most ardent regime supporters. And the more you support the regime, the more you are rewarded with more senior positions. But where we did find a group of defectors was from the University of Aleppo. These were individuals largely who were involved in the NUSS prior to the Syrian revolution, and subsequently they decided that they were not interested in following the orders that were given to them to suppress protests. It is a very tricky situation to be in when you're a defector, but yeah, these individuals, what they do is they find ways not to follow orders or to stay under the radar until they can safely defect from that institution. And there is no way to say for the NUSS or any other regime-affiliated entity. There's no way to say, I don't want to do this anymore. That's not an option that you have. So when you defect, you have to escape. You either escape the city and you go into hiding, or you escape the country as a whole. So I hope that clarifies.
Yeah.
I
forgot
forgot
what
was
was my question.
about protecting civilians, and then we had a question for you on, protecting and supporting the victims who are taking part in these processes or giving their testimonies. How can we best support them? And also there was a question for you online about how can those of us who are in the UK now raise our voices?
Let me think. I think I wanted just to follow up on the previous question about the student union, if you don't mind, just to second what Yasmine said. From just the personal experience and being there on campus, I haven't, in University of Damascus, I haven't heard of defectors who were able later to say, I quit, but the people we knew were, let's say, some sort of informants for us, staying under the radar, being in meetings with the leadership of the student union, telling us activists, the people who participated in actions on campus, that were being investigated or sought after, etc. And they were putting themselves in a very, very risky and dangerous position to be able to do this. And and in terms of recruitment, it was another thing, I think, on campus. It was such a common knowledge that we didn't even think about it twice, that on campus, we don't expect to be in direct contact with the security, like with the mukhabarat or with the intelligence forces of the regime. We were genuinely expecting our friends and colleagues, and it was such a fearful environment because you never know who's among your friend group or classmates who have shown extreme support to the regime and have been, if you want to call it, groomed of some sort for their political affiliation to participate in the crackdown. Later on, we came to know that, this person who sat next to us in this laboratory or something, now they have a gun by their side and they're participating in delivering students and students who have died eventually. So I wasn't under any impression that there was any coercion in that recruitment. Supporting the victims, I don't know where to begin from, actually. But I think, is it okay if I start from the point when we talked about refugees and their safety, maybe just because I work with refugees quite a lot. And I think Yasmine spoke about this kind of, to encourage the UK government and all European countries to take a more human rights centered approach, where it just, pains me year after year, witnessing the political scene in Europe and how it seems like, or it feels like, the world is becoming more of a Syria rather than the world getting rid of a Syria, where the political discussion is around security and national interest and border security and turning refugees and survivors into populist talking points for elections. This is, I think, the bigger umbrella where we should start, and then from that everything comes in terms of supporting the victims, starting with not sending them back, understanding that you mentioned the Home Office, Mazen, earlier, and I know that there has been more of a discussion around whether Syria is a safe country to return people to, following in the suit of the amazing countries of Turkey and Lebanon, where this is, we know, for example, that the Home Office prepares something that's called country expert reports. And I wonder, I actually don't have a lot of knowledge. I wonder where, based on what kind of research those reports are produced, but I would think one way of raising our voices is to ensure that our voices as survivors and British citizens, Syrian British citizens, are included in this type of research around whether Syria is a safe country to return to. We are the ones who get to say how we would feel, and we are the ones who could comment on directly our physical and psychological well-being if we are to be sent back. I was just, a little anecdote that I was recently just working on a medical legal report around for a compensation case, suing the Home Office for a compensation case for a refugee who was detained for a longer period of time at one of those holding centers, and how the practices and the overcrowdedness and the dirtiness of the place may have kind of compounded or exacerbated this person already fragile mental state. Within their jurisdiction, within a human rights approach, this young man would have been entitled to up to £50,000 in compensation for being held in a detention center here in the UK. I can't, for the life of me, imagine somebody returning to Syria being faced with the images and pictures to the actual physical place where they have been humiliated, tortured, and traumatized. I can't see this is happening if we're taking a human rights and if we're centralizing the physical and emotional well-being of survivors. Then I have something to say about the NHS, which takes hours and hours, where we need to kind of serve more, fund more services to help refugees and migrants, rather than focusing on the mainstream services. The needs are high, and the Home Office is perhaps doing a little on certain schemes to bring, that was in the past to bring Syrian refugees, but now reactivating the Afghan scheme to bring families to the UK. All of this is not being met equally with services that are needed to help those newcomers heal and flourish into the future. And I can only emphasize how the intergenerational impact of that is would not be optimal if we don't support newcomers.
Thanks, Yaman. Back to the floor. There were some other hands that had gone up last time. We'll do one quick round. Yes, over there, and then in the front here. Very quick questions, not comments, and then we'll go to the panel.
Sure. Just very quickly, Mazen, how do you think the civil society organizations here in the UK might support the UK government doing what they have to do? Because obviously, and also from what you guys saying, and the UK government or the system here does not seem that agile system. I don't think that we are expecting a lot of efforts to be made here without a push from the civil society organizations. And also in terms of organizing the effort in that regard, because also, that justice opportunities and justice efforts might be organized in a way that they do not conflict each other's. For instance, if we manage to impose sanctions or to designate those people on the sanction list by the UK, for instance, that might result in visa bans, and therefore they will never reach the UK soils and will never be prosecuted here, right? So even the different accountability mechanisms might conflict. So how can we organize our work? What is expected from the civil society organizations? And the other thing, do you think that the UK might benefit from the structural investigations or in Germany, in Sweden, because the other countries are coordinating their work with each other. So they are building their results according to their investigations. So how can UK benefit from that, especially after Brexit? Thank you so much.
Thank you. And there's one more here.
Hi, Katya. Thank you very much for organizing this. I'm going to skip the pleasantries straight away to the question. My question for you is regarding momentum So with the dwindling support and resources and attention, what crucial compromises we must consider to keep the Syrian crisis on the international agenda? How can we maintain momentum despite limited funding and support structures in countries like the UK? As an academic, and I'm part of a wider Syrian community, we face this constant problem of actually lacking funding to do what we'd like to do. And the problem is we find ourselves in a position where we are compromising constantly on our topic, limiting our ambitions in order to fit a wider agenda through which we can find support. So with all these competing other problems in the world, how can we keep that momentum? And I wonder if there is at all on the horizon, a project like transitional justice for Syria kind of institution or umbrella that we could all come under and collaborate at some point. Thank you.
Thank you. What I want to do is go to each person for your final thoughts and to answer the questions that were relevant to you. Mazen, you had one directed to you, so why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And let us start also. You mentioned that we don't have in UK very big refugee. I know that there is maybe almost 40,000. So please, those be 40,000 victim and witness. So we need from the UK civil society, Syrian especially, activists, we need to document those 40,000 victim or witness. This is very important. And this is something we can do it as a Syrian. Even with this shortage of funding and all this problem, but still this is can do it. And this is very, very important. And please do it. Yes, indeed. You can benefit from other country, and there is a cooperation, and they benefit. Also, can say that also they, and there is a cooperation regarding Syria, but even broader. UK part from genocide network in Europe, and again they are also part from Europol. So there is this connection. There is also official frames and official transfer for the experience and the information. It's about the political will, maybe. Now, no, there's no, all of us know, there is no transitional justice in Syria, and it's need political transition to have transitional justice. This is, usually they don't say it, the politician, even the EU, said that we support the process of the universal, the
Triple AM.
no. العدالة الانتقالية political transitional justice, sorry. How? Without political transition? And some also naive country or Dublin said that we support dealing with the past. Sorry, now there is a crime in Syria. Now there is people suffering torture, killing in the security service branches. So, no, there is, but justice is not a revenge. We don't seek justice for revenge. It's for peace, for our future, for the future of our children. And yeah, how we can help maybe the refugee, and if they want to go back, I'm one of those refugees. And believe me, honestly, I want to go back. For a lot of reasons. Maybe the language one of them. But if I lucky and survive from death, how you can ask me to go back because Syria is safe? Same regime, same security service, same laws, same method, without solving anything from what happened. And tell me, please, need to go back. And this is your country, and you need to build your country. And say, I'm guilty, I don't want. to build my country, or I don't want to go back. But it seems without transitional justice, without accountability, smart accountability, balanced accountability, we will not be able to hold account each one. It seemed like you told me, please, they don't succeed to kill you first time, and they deserve second chance. Please go and take your children and give them second chance to kill you. I'm sorry, I will not go back. I will go to Rwanda, maybe, but I will not go back.
Okay. Thanks, Mazen. I think that's a really important roundup. We've got 1 minute each. Fadel, how do we keep the momentum going?
Momentum, it's I think that there is many issues we can work through, like cooperation, and that at least our strategy in SNHR, that we are not only just publishing our own report, rather than we are cooperating with other even stronger institutions such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, even the UN bodies. When they are publishing a report, their reach is higher, and they have their own staff for communicating with countries. And I'm very much aware how is the process of those institutions, because we are working closely. Regarding also the working closely with the states, every state, they have their own report about Syria, and we need to cooperate with them, and even the European Union for refugees, and like almost we are cooperating with all of those, and they are relying on SNHR because of our methodology. And I would like, but we don't have time, maybe next event we can speak about the importance of documentation, and how if it's not done properly, it can cause harm rather than serve the aim and the goal. It's very essential. So I think we can keep the momentum, relying on our own strength, but building a solid partnership with prolonged institutions such as those I mentioned. Thanks.
You're welcome to talk about methodology at the reception downstairs in just 2 minutes' time. Yasmine, you had a bit of a success, or maybe success is the wrong word, but some actual outcomes with the Olympics as a result of your report. Can you quickly tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Emma. I mentioned earlier that one of the individuals from the NUSS at Aleppo University rose through the ranks and became the vice president of the Syria General Sports Committee. This was an individual who was in a leadership position within the NUSS. He was a member of the NUSS Executive Bureau, and he was directly responsible for overseeing the NUSS response to the protests at the University of Aleppo. His name is Omar Aroub. And like I mentioned earlier, the NUSS is also a system that identifies future Syrian leaders for the regime, and he indeed rose up the ranks. He served a term in Syrian parliament between 2016 and 2020. And then in 2020, he became the vice president of Syria's General Sports Federation. And in 2023, he was appointed as the head of the Paralympics Committee for Syria. He traveled to Paris in August of last year, and he was supposed to represent the regime in the Paris Olympics this year in July. Now, even, not as an investigator, just as a Syrian, to see a war criminal have this post and be present on an international stage such as the Olympics. Some would argue that you separate sports from politics, but there is nothing further from the truth. And even the Olympic slogan is sport and more than sport. You can't separate these two aspects. And it also goes back to what I was saying earlier about the regime using these systems, the NUSS, former NUSS members, this supposed civil society or institutions, to rebrand its image. And so we knew that Omar Aroub was potentially going to be in the Olympics, and we cooperated with the Syria Campaign and Action for Sema to launch an advocacy campaign aimed at the International Olympics Committee to ban him from the Olympics. And the most recent response that we got from the committee was that he did not have accreditation to attend. Whether he decided not to attend or whether the committee decided not to accredit him was not made clear to us. Of course, we would have been happier if he was arrested and held to account for his for the crimes that he committed against countless victims and survivors. But here again, we had to balance the response with the potential or the likelihood of arrest and prosecution, and what our what our calculations told us was that there was a very low probability due to legal constraints, but also due to procedural constraints. So we would count this as a very modest success, and we're happy that even through this non-legal process, we were able to stop the presence of a former senior NUSS member from attending an international event. And I wanted to share that to end with a very modest success story.
Thanks, Yasmine. Yaman, final thought, 1 minute. Leave us with.
I think I've been just, as we do as psychologists are trained to do, is to always and only reflect. I've been reflecting on how I'm feeling now over the past, 90 minutes we're sitting on this panel. And perhaps I just mentioned at the beginning, before I read my testimony, around how what I was about to read has happened 12 to 13 years ago. And just, keep, comprehending the fact, that all of those many years, and a lot has happened since in my life. It can be quite, I don't know, it can feel quite funny, or one could feel a bit cynical or helpless or hopeless about having done this, been there so many times over the years, and the situation in Syria and the perpetrators are still in power, holding on to it, going to the Olympics, what have you. But just balancing that psychological position always, it's very understandable, and it's very understandable defense mechanism, as they say, but balancing that with the fact that I'm quite grateful to be here and quite grateful that we still have all of those great people who worked on the report. They interviewed me, and they're dedicating life, effort, energy, skills, passion into those efforts for the victims and their families and the future health, political and social health of Syria. So this is a moment of gratitude that we're still talking about it.
That's a perfect way to end. Okay. I was going to say, except for the fact that no, but they don't. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much again to everyone who has hosted us.
Just, I'm sorry,
Except that someone else had 30 seconds.
just because we have a guest from Tunisia. I will not mention the name, but this is also a reminder of our colleague, lawyer and journalist Sonia Dahmani, who was in the prison. So also, please, Amnesty and Syrian organization, we need also to see practical action about Sonia, which she faces 3 cases, and she's in the prison, and she's very good, close, also human rights defender. That's it. Thank you. And thank you for your coming.
Thank you to Amnesty for hosting us, the Syrian British Consortium for organizing, all of our wonderful panelists, all of you for attending online and in person. There is a reception downstairs if you want to stay and talk more, find out more about what's going on. But thank you again. The end.
Thank you.
And in a falling job. Somewhere there.